Hello, welcome to episode 4 of Beckett's group therapy. Boozie, Boujee, Beckett. My name is Hunter.
My name is Alice.
I'm Nick.
Scott.
Shelby. Oh, good job.
And Scott right here.
That was great. I mean, up until you two, it really flowed well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, today we plan on essentially discussing everything that we've talked about pertaining to Beckett's great body of work and, focusing on the unnameable because we just finished it and, going from there. So.
And to celebrate it being the end of the semester, we're drinking some booze for Beckett. So should we go around and say what we're drinking to start out?
Yeah, who wants to start?
I can.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, Shelby.
I'm very bad at interrupting people. I am drinking a vodka Red Bull.
I'm drinking a Crown and Coke.
I went the classier route with the Coors Light for today. Yeah.
I've gone for lemon gin and tonic and a load of fruit just because I was feeling fancy.
I love that. And I settled for water. So it's not carbonated, contrary to how it might look in the camera, I swear.
It's not vodka in a jar.
No. It's just like straight rubbing alcohol, actually. Jokes on you.
Everclear.
Yeah, get some Everclear out here.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I know prior to this, the beginning of this podcast, we kind of wanted to describe a way in which each of our dreams or our drinks fits into Beckett's work. So if anybody wants to go off with that, I could also start.
Go for it. I think you should start.
Okay. Well, I mean, kind of on the fly when I was thinking about water, I mean, when I think of the consistency or like the transparency of water, I think that can easily be found in Beckett's work and kind of, it's almost like writing, getting to the core of just something that almost escapes being written about. I mean, even the unnameable, it's like, it's so transparent, so clear cut, and yet it's almost hard to just make out what the idea is. So there's my complicated idea. You guys can try and top that if you want.
Okay, I'm not going to top it, but I'll do my best. So the paper I'm in the process of writing currently is all about the suffering that is integral to human consciousness. And so I've gone for lemon gin to symbolize the bitterness of the worldview that is apparent in the unnameable.
I love that. That's great.
I can take mine down a more humorous route. So I'm drinking Crown and Coke because Coke to cocaine. Samuel Beckett had to be on cocaine to write the unnameable. I mean, it's insane.
That's kind of where I was going. His writing is on steroids, and Red Bull is caffeine on steroids.
Fair enough.
Well, for mine, we talked about obliteration a lot in class and the disintegration of humanity in a sense. And if you drink enough of these bad boys when the mountains are blue, I guess, like Malloy, you'll be disintegrated to your finest counterparts.
Oh, Scott.
Also, you might pee your pants too, so.
Oh, relevant on so many levels. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys sharing what you're drinking.
I feel like the type of person, no offense, Scott, that drinks like Coors Light is like Malloy, like decrepit, and he's just trying to get to that Coors Light, the last can he can find.
He's crawling through a forest. He's
Yeah.
on, like the barren floor of the forest, and he's dragging his way to get to that Coors Light.
Yeah.
That would be the worst Coors Light advert I've ever created.
I guess I can't speak personally, but I've known some people's legs to give out from certain types of alcohol, so it's not quite off pace there, I guess.
Oh man, that's great.
So what do we think if Beckett was sitting in on this talk? What would he be drinking?
Oh gosh.
Given that he was Irish, I think some whiskey would have to be involved somehow.
This is very true.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying. It's escaping my mind right now. There's like the alcoholic base used in Jägermeister. It's like a super dark licorice alcoholic beverage. I can't think of the name of it. It's escaping me right now, but I would like to throw that on the table of possibility as well. Like he might be drinking that.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I could see him being a whiskey
Absinthe?
guy.
Absinthe. That's the name of it. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Shelby. I literally it escaped my mind, but yeah, I would tell.
That's some like hallucinogenics.
Perfect.
There we go, folks.
Yeah.
There we go.
Honestly, I think some kind of substance must be involved to write the unnameable, a creature that has like no body parts, no eyelids, just eyes that stare in one direction, crying constantly. Like I can't believe that a rational mind could think of that.
Yeah, and I mean, like going back to my idea, it seems so irrational, but there's still just like moments, especially the first half, because we talked about the philosophy of it and Ben's written about it, but there are just some moments where it seems like so transparent with like not what it's trying to achieve, but just like what it is essentially. It's blows my mind, gets to some weird thoughts.
Yeah. So if instead of Beckett, if Dr. Lubner was joining us for the Beckett talk, what would he be drinking? I feel like in class he mentioned that he would get with a group of friends and drink wine while he would read was it Finnegan's Wake, the James Joyce book?
Yeah, it was Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, but
yeah, I think it was Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
So I could see him very a red wine type of guy. What do you guys think?
Like imported red wine.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
I see him as a Coors Light guy personally. I mean, we both like basketball. We've talked about that now, and I think we could just drink some beers and talk about the NBA when the mountains are blue enough. So
yeah, I mean he said he liked John Stockton and Karl Malone, and like the Coors Light, like that's what non-winners drink.
It's the best drink for winners that come from the Himalayas. So
wow,
I could see it. That's a fair point, Scott.
I think maybe if it's coming to the end of classes, he'd want something a bit more like a celebration drink. So I feel like wine and Coors Light might be a more regular beverage, but if he's celebrating, maybe like a spiced rum and Coke.
Oh wow!
Really particular spiced rum. This is what I'm getting.
I feel like we're just now giving him ideas. Like what during this podcast, it'll be like a scratch of the chin, some thoughtfulness about it. I was gonna
say, be like one of those people that goes like real fruity, like a margarita or like sangria.
I mean, honestly, who doesn't love a good margarita though?
That's a good point. That is a good
getting warmer too.
I was also thinking, I mean, just like top of my head, like Kirkland white wine.
Yeah.
Just settling for the basics. Maybe got it from Costco before, they sold out all their wine and alcoholic beverages.
Did they really? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I don't think we came to a consensus, but hopefully one of us is right.
I have a good feeling I am. So
Yeah, I agree, Scott. Your drink is very accessible.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, who here hasn't had at least a Coors Light? Like, everyone's had a Coors Light before.
this is my first time drinking a Coors Light. Just kidding.
Oh. Awesome. Well, yeah, we can just dive head in to Beckett then, as usual. It's so weird being on like the camera for this being our podcast medium now,
Yeah.
without the audio.
Everyone's adjusting their hair.
Yeah, everyone's like getting all set up. I'm trying not to move around a lot, though I'd probably be all over the place.
Yeah, I feel like I've moved back like 100 times.
Yeah, but yeah, well, let's just jump head in. I mean, we could start with the unnameable. We could.
Yeah.
One
Does
of the,
anyone want to start?
yeah, so one of the things that I thought was really applicable and will be kind of incorporated into my reflection was the notion of the cave that Ben's wrote about in the library or in D2L, and how specifically how screens are involved in that. And as I look around this room that I'm literally doing this podcast in, I have approximately 4 screens, or in this case, distractions at that point, just kind of with like that Western thought ideology just kind of blocking my enlightenment, I guess is a way of putting it at this point. Or I just thought that was really relatable right now with just my dependence on like screens given this quarantine and all that, and being able to receive an education online because of this quarantine and all that. I just thought that was really applicable to now, and I think I'm kind of focus my writing on that. I just what were your guys' thoughts about the cave, I guess, in this with the enigma, because I just found that really applicable to this current situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, going straight from the cave, yeah, I mean, the idea behind Plato's allegory of the cave is talking about seeing the world as it really is, like the world of forms, without the projections on the wall, these screens. And yeah, it's so interesting because, even with Ben's acknowledgement of the cave in his writing, I've seen Plato's cave here, but I've also seen this as somewhat as like a satire, I guess you could say, or like a kind of negating of Western philosophy. Samuel Beckett writes Western philosophy as it is, and then from the heart of it with Descartes and Plato and Kant, he kind of just makes a joke out of it, makes it seem like the grounds it's all built up on is, less stable than we usually take it to be. Yeah, I mean, yeah, very interesting.
As a philosophy major, did that kind of apply to you in a sense, I guess, or did you kind of find it to be not quite on point?
I really think that Samuel Beckett did an incredible job in kind of how he treated the unnameable as like a philosophical treatise without a direct point almost. It's like he's taking on the whole thought of Western philosophy, everything from like mind-body dualism down to, like the allegory of the cave. And he just kind of does this blend of it and decides to point out, hey, like, what if we didn't think this way? Or I think this way because of all of this pent-up thought. So yeah, no, I think Samuel Beckett did an incredible job, though it confused me like 98% of the time. So
yeah, I definitely found the unnameable like the least accessible text of his for sure, and it's been really interesting so for my project, like I'm trying to emulate in whatever way I can the writing style that he uses for the unnameable. And I've just been, playing around with that. And just like the style that he uses is just so different than anything I've ever like tried to write like before. it's just so interesting to me, and like it's kind of given me, because when I first started reading the Unnameable, I was like, I'm not a fan of this text, like I'm struggling through it, and like even though I struggled a little bit with Malloy and Malone Dies, like I still got it, after a little bit, and like I got into it and I really liked it. Well, this one I struggled through the whole way through, like trying to write like that, it's just like that's why it makes me think like he has to, like, I just don't know how he achieved that. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree in it being the most confusing of the texts.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were some parts of the Unnameable when, I was like, I can almost picture what is happening now. I can understand, like I can decipher some kind of plot line, like a small, like kind of sub story within the overall story. But then there were other times I don't even think the text itself knew quite what was happening. Like, who is the they? Is the Unnameable like the same as Worm and Mahood, or are they different parts of it? Where does Malone fit in? Like, I read one critical essay that kind of took it for granted that the Unnameable was just a post-mortem state of Malone. There are just so many different possibilities, and once I thought I'd grasped one for certain, something else would be said, and I was like, okay, maybe this isn't right. And it took me a lot of rereading and a lot of critical reading to see what other people think, to kind of formulate my ideas of kind of what I think the text is saying overall.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And I think it also echoes a lot of his work, and something that I've thought through so much of reading him is, of Beckett's work, is like my constant search to find a plot and to find these specific things that I look for in every single text, and he just doesn't give it to us, really. Like he just refuses to give us a plot and like a character arc and things that I'm like so trained to look for. And so now it's kind of weird. I'm in like a weird state where I like am watching other like shows and things like that, and it's like I am catching myself like trying to decipher the plot and the character arcs, and I'm like, wait, but like Beckett's work, he doesn't even like, is that what I should be looking at? I think that's been one of the biggest takeaways from his work, at least for me. But I think that's just how I've been trained to think about things, is through a very rigid structure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, bouncing between the two of you, it's more like this because Alice, you're in the bottom, and Nick, you're to my side. But yeah, I think it's interesting referring to some of the critical literature that people have just taken this state of the Unnameable to be Malone, after death. I find that very interesting because coming at it through the Buddhist framework and the existentialist framework I've put over Beckett the whole time we've been reading him, I thought of it more of, kind of bouncing between like consciousness and this idea of the ego and rebirth between, you have the Unnameable and Worm. And even going to what you said, Nick, like it's kind of using the median of a novel and of narrative in writing, and just kind of flips it. It's very piecemeal. It kind of flips it on its head because uses conventional methods of making up a novel. We regard it as a quote unquote novel, but it doesn't do that at all. I mean, the most consistency we have with characters is like Worm, and then there's Madeline at one point, whose name may well change going on to the next page.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, do you guys think, like, would you categorize The Unnameable as a novel or something else, or?
Broadly, yes. I would say, like, it is a book, but, like, a novel goes into that. I don't know. I think you'd have to, like, sift through, like, the layers of what defines a book or what defines a novel to make it there.
Yeah.
But if not a novel, then what else?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a novel, and it reminds me of, so I took a lot of film classes at the beginning of college, and one of the professors often talked about how films can do literally anything, but they do so little because they're they have to be a certain structure to get everyone on the same page. And I think Beckett is just showing like how much a novel can do. It can do so much. It can do anything basically, like that the mind can reach, that language can reach. But yet 99% of novels do something so similar. And I think that's been one of the really, it's been one of the difficult parts for me about reading Beckett. Like I've struggled with it, but it's also been one of the really cool parts of like seeing him push the boundaries of what a novel can be.
Yeah. And I mean, not to get specifically out of the unnameable, but talking about Beckett's other works, it's interesting to think one of your professors talked about how film has the ability to do anything it wants to virtually, and yet it still like kind of settles, I guess you could say, for the same
Yeah.
structure. And I find that in a lot of Beckett's work too, because it's like Beckett will go between pages 1 and 120 and just do something that completely is like breaking down the bones and the structure of narrative and even just of like philosophical thought, like we saw in this last one. And yet he always keeps it to like the same page limit, like the same criteria of a particular novel in order to just fit all of those ideas inside. I guess that's kind of a meta way of looking at it, but I still find it very interesting he does that.
So another question that I've got for you guys, which will also bring into the conversation, particularly the other two works of the trilogy. Do you think that The Unnameable works well as like a standalone novel? Or do you think that you really need to have read Malloy and Malone Dies beforehand to get its full impact? Like, what do you think is like the pros and cons of that?
Well, I mean, if the Unnameable was my first introduction to Beckett, like I don't even think I would have finished it if it wasn't for a class. And I think that's different with Malloy and even Malone Dies. Like I think, if I got over the initial hump of like trying to grasp what was going on, that I'd try to finish the book. The Unnameable, I feel like I might not. And so at least personally, I think it probably functions best as the end novel of a trilogy versus like a standalone book. But I don't really know. It'd be interesting to hear someone who that was their first introduction to Beckett.
Mhm.
I wonder how much Ben thought about making sure Malloy was the first text we read. Like if he, over even like Waiting for Godot or some of the plays, making sure that what's the best introductory Beckett text, and like what how different experiences people have if they read The Unnameable first or one of his plays first.
That's a really interesting way to look at it, because I was thinking more of along the lines of content, Alice. When you asked that question, I was thinking, well, if I hadn't read Malloy and if I hadn't read Malone Dies, could I make sense of this text? Which I still don't even know if I made sense of it alone. But with that in mind, I'm unsure if it's necessary to read the other texts in order to make like sense of The Unnameable itself, or at least maybe how Beckett intended. And it kind of makes me think back to the idea I recently watched. I don't know if any of you have seen Twin Peaks, David Lynch and Mark Frost Twin Peaks. Well, essentially early 90s show, made 2 seasons, it got canceled, and they came back 25 years later and made the 3rd season in 2017. And essentially what David Lynch, the creator of the show, argues is that everything you needed was already individually set up in each season. So like all the information you needed to understand how the show functioned, because it's a confusing show with a lot of Beckett influence in it, is just there. So I'm wondering if that's how the trilogy works. It's like each book has everything you need to know to get the point or Beckett's intentions, and you don't need to read all 3. Yeah, that's a crazy thought out there, but
yeah, I mean, I guess maybe like I also, I mean, because of my background in film, I compare it to how much of a Star Wars nerd I am. and the original trilogy, and how much like because I watched it in order when I first watched it when I was little, that I was like, oh, you have to watch it this way. But then when I talk to people and they might say they saw Return of the Jedi or Empire Strikes Back first, and they still got the series fine, they still got all the great moments fine, because they're all of the individual films are strong enough on their own that probably the Unnameable, it's like if you're gonna be able to get through a Beckett text before you read Beckett, like it doesn't matter which text you're gonna read. So I guess that's a good point.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I'm happy as far as like a class structure perspective that this wasn't the first reading of Beckett that we had. I don't necessarily think that it had to be. I wouldn't have to read Malloy to understand the Unnameable, but I'm happy that it was, just because that was I felt it was the most difficult read by far
Yeah,
in the class. And yeah, as far as just getting a perspective, like starting with Malloy, then going to Endgame and Waiting for Godot and all those other pieces, like you get a feel for Beckett and what his writing typically does. Like instead of giving you everything, he kind of takes it away. He's that decomposing writer. And so I think like with Malloy, you see that long paragraph to start off with, like that 80-page paragraph, and you get the same type of thing in Unnameable too, and you kind of know what to expect. Like as far as context goes, I don't think I needed to read the other two novels to understand the Unnameable, but I felt like just to be familiar with Beckett himself, I thought it was important to kind of.
That's a great way to put it. It's like stylistically.
Mhm.
I thought of that today. I'm not going to say who the comedian was in hopes of not offending anybody, but I was watching a comedian today do a special, and I was like, I wonder if I don't find them funny because I haven't made sense of like their body of work before this. Like I don't know their style, I don't know their approach. It's like, oh, sorry,
unbelievable.
random call. But I can't make sense of their work potentially because I don't know the template for their work. Whereas with Beckett, it's like we see another paragraph spanning 80 pages, and that's just like a given. You know, we expect that. So
I want to know what comedian it is.
I'll tell you after this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with most of what's been said on the question. I agree that like you don't necessarily need to have read the other two texts in order to grasp what the Unnamable's about. But I do think that having read the two texts beforehand does kind of add to the overall experience. Like these three texts are in a trilogy for a reason. You know, otherwise they would have just been published as three standalone pieces.
Yeah.
And there are critics that argue that the Unnamable is kind of and like it's all of Beckett's other characters kind of combined into one. And I haven't read enough into that to give a clear overview, but also I feel like that there are themes that kind of continue throughout the three novels of the trilogy. I personally kind of am able to read a progressive disillusionment of the protagonists, you know, moving into the Unnamable, who's, you know, is this embodiment of pure consciousness, and you know, even in his post-mortem state is still suffering. So yeah, in a nutshell, I think that yeah, you can read all three as standalone texts, but the experience is heightened if you've read the other two, and
Yeah, I
possibly
agree.
I agree.
I definitely
Like
agree with
when
that.
you get to hear about, you know, Malloy and then compare Malloy to like when you get to Malone Dies and make the connections between, okay, is like who is like is Malone a representation of what Malloy, like just like a representation of Malloy, or is it, you know, there's so many different readings that come about because they're put back to back to back. And so I enjoy that aspect of it a lot, or I did enjoy a lot of that during the
They do make a little bit of reference to Malone and Malloy in the Unnameable too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone else got any like questions about like to pose to the group? Something similar?
Not really a question. On note of what you said, Alice, and regarding the unnameable, not only is like the culmination of all Samuel Beckett's characters, but like post-mortem, like whatever the afterlife might be and the inevitability of suffering still, and that just, man, it's like in my own thought of Samuel Beckett playing around and potentially even half-heartedly rejecting some of Western thought. I feel like he really takes on a lot of Eastern thought as far as like Buddhism and Hinduism go. I mean, I feel, and Taoism even, I found some similarities, at least in my mind's eye. And I think it's interesting that kind of in his own rejection of that, like you talk about the inevitability of suffering, and it's like Buddhism alone really supports that. Eastern philosophy alone supports that. And the only escape from that would be like what's called like the break-in cycle or nirvana, enlightenment, coming back to the allegory of the cave. It's like seeing the world as it really is. So yeah, I think that's great. I think it's crazy to see the parallels in there. Yeah.
I'm curious at what you guys thought of the class as a whole and Beckett's work as a whole, like looking at it like bigger picture almost, and like, what were your favorite books? Did you like the structure of how we read the books? And we kind of talked about that a little bit. And just kind of your viewpoint on Beckett and your experience in the class.
One of the things that I thought was so cool about just focusing on one author is just how in depth you get to learn about their specific writing styles and their specific tendencies to like what they write about. Also, just the rarity of the like current world occurrences right now. I thought that was really applicable to the structure of the class too, or not the structure of the class, but just what we were reading in general. And I just overall I really enjoyed this because I've never focused on an author as specifically in this as Beckett as I have before, and I just thought that was a really unique and cool experience to do.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I took a class that we read like 15 books in like one semester, so it was really nice just to like kind of take it a slower pace and get to know one author specifically. As well as in this class, I felt like it was so nice to like have people that you could talk about just like we're doing, and like get other opinions and learn more about how others are thinking, which a lot of teachers I don't think give us as much opportunity to do. So I really enjoyed that because I felt like that was a great opportunity for us as students just to like learn more about a different type of learning than what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as well. And I think going back to the idea of just focusing on Samuel Beckett, I don't know, I think he actually has worked his way into being probably in my top 3, maybe my top 5 favorite authors. I've really enjoyed his work. And we were talking about it the other day, how I said that I enjoyed Endgame more over Waiting for Godot, and that kind of surprised Nick. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just like an element of, I mean, once again, going back to what I said with the water, but transparency. Like there's rawness to where there are moments where Malloy seems to be going on a ramble in his thought as he's moving or sitting, Lord knows what. And there's just pieces that not only emotionally are very expressive, but just like resonate with me, and seeing how like my thoughts are always like streaming, and how Beckett kind of captures that in essence. So
Yeah, I definitely compare it to, because last semester I took a class studying a genre with Linda Carell. I know Alice is taking her right now, and she's a badass. And it's interesting comparing studying a genre where you look at so many different writing styles to kind of get this overview of if that one was queer literature and how queer literature has functioned and kind of evolved. But to study Beckett, I think specifically as the central author is really unique, because I'm trying to think of like if I read, say I was taking a class on, plays and reading Tennessee Williams and people, in the 1900s, and then you throw in, Endgame or something like that, how different of a perspective I would have on Beckett versus taking a class where you get to read not only his plays but his novels. I really enjoyed it, and I think he's a really good author. I would not like him nearly as much as I do, and like how Hunter said, how he's in maybe his top 5, top 3 authors of his favorite authors. Like, I don't think I would like Beckett as much if I just read one of his texts, which is interesting because Dr. Lunar talked about how, and we've talked about this a lot in just, in our meetings, about how when we started the class, it was like, okay, it's just Beckett. Like, you don't read one book of Beckett and you get to move on. It's all Beckett. And I actually think that probably turns some people away. But for me, it's giving me a picture of Beckett that I don't think I would have gotten with just reading one of his novels.
Yeah, so I came into this class having not read one of Beckett's texts before, and honestly, this class has probably altered the course of the rest of my undergraduate degree, because it's actually prompted me to select kind of a similar genre module for my final year next year back home in England. And it's also made me reevaluate what I want to write my dissertation on next year. So I don't know if you guys have the same thing, but my degree will be like finished with like a 10,000, 12,000 word essay, which obviously is a massive like research commitment. And I thought I knew what I wanted to write on, but I've genuinely enjoyed this class and Beckett's work so much. I've started to think of other kind of directions I could go with that. And just while I've got the opportunity, I just want to say how genuinely enjoyable it's been with the whole group website format.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I hadn't have come to do exchange at MSU, I would never experience anything remotely like that. And it's genuinely been so much fun, just like putting together these podcasts and deciding what's going on the website each launch.
Yeah, so I think we have less than a minute in this specific Zoom call. So I don't know if, because I know Scott and Shelby have to leave in a second. So if you guys want to say a few last things, then we might get back on with just me, Hunter, and Alice to kind of wrap up the podcast. But if Scott and Shelby want to say anything else before they have to leave.
Yeah, I would just say, like, thanks, guys. This was really fun. And we did a good job overall. Like, I felt like we gelled a lot as a group, so it was really fun overall.
Yeah, one of the things I like about this class specifically was the creative venues we could kind of choose to take and so forth, like a podcast or like a video where I literally just make fun of myself. I can't imagine another class I'll ever have the opportunity to do that in and apply that to what I'm reading. And I just feel like that's a really rare and really genuine thing that I enjoy doing for any type of my schoolwork. And it just adds another layer of fun that I don't think I'd really experience in a lot of other classroom settings or in my future work. So I just really appreciate that opportunity and to work with you guys too, not to get too mushy, but.
I love the fact that Scott told us that he's tree number 4. I'll never get over that. I think it's hilarious and I love it.
No, I will forever think of Scott with tree number 4. I don't think I'll even be able to pull the two apart.
Should before I leave this Zoom, should we maybe do one cheers?
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
My empty glass.
All right.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Okay, well, welcome back. Here we are at our podcast again. We no longer have Scott or Shelby due to other.
Yeah, I think Scott had class.
Yeah, that's their excuse at least.
Damn economics major.
No.
Awesome. Well, we're back at it.
Sweet. So I think we were talking about just overall thoughts on the class. So if anyone has any more takes on it, if they enjoyed it, parts of Beckett maybe that we didn't like, or how the class was structured.
Oh yeah, that's where we left off. Oh, Alice, on the note of this class influencing kind of like the direction of your whole undergraduate studies. I mean, I feel that to a similar route because before this class, I had a semester with the Wild Rockies Field Institute. So I had a field course and I was camping for 2.5 months and kayaking. And then I came back and hopped into my classes, and it was really monotonous and just, the same standard of kind of what goes on with a lot of university classes. You still learn a lot, but the procedure is all the same. And I think this class, not only Ben, but paired with Samuel Beckett's text and insight and overall just kind of weirdness in its own way, has really also influenced me in like what I want to do with my undergraduate studies as well.
What do you want to do with your undergraduate studies?
So currently I'm still studying philosophy and English education. And what I'm hoping to do now is to branch off into literature instead of English education.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I love
Great
it.
side.
Live for it. And also, I mean, philosophy, like this whole course has just been like me dabbling in a little bit of every kind of philosophical text, Like I talked about in the last half, Descartes, and now I'm studying different things in Beckett and Zen by Paul Foster, right beside me. Yeah, it's such an intriguing lens to look at Beckett through. Yeah, it's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest impact hasn't. I think the group work is pretty interesting because I feel like one of the reasons, because I used to be a film major, and then I was gonna originally double major in film and literature, and then I decided that I just couldn't handle film anymore, even though I still want to be a screenwriter one day.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is I left that because I was getting a little frustrated with the group of people I was surrounded with and the group projects that were like I would be filming till 3 a.m. and like I was like, man, I hate group work. I'm just gonna stick to literature where there's no group work. And then like pretty quickly I had a group, but like this group has been a lot better, and I think that's just the atmosphere also of like the English department I think is really awesome. But I think Lubner, Dr. Lubner as a whole, and taking 2 classes with him, I think he's really pushed me because the worst part of my writing, I think at least, is I'm so god awful with grammar. And he has just roasted me, especially in the other class. I love it, to push me to be better. And so I really enjoyed that with him and Beckett. Like, I mean, I doubt I would have ever stumbled across Beckett, just on my own. Like in the other class, we were reading Virginia Woolf, reading James Joyce, people that I probably would have tried to read eventually. And I know that Alice doesn't like Woolf, which will get Lubner.
You don't have to call me out like that.
Yeah, which will get Lubner fired up because I think, he's a pretty big Virginia Woolf fan. I hope he calls you out in our comments, but
I got it now.
But yeah, I think it's been cool to read Beckett, and he, I think just as a teacher, he's definitely like pushed me to. He's just specifically pushed the parts of my writing that are the worst, I think, which has been cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, really admirable. Yeah.
So should we take a little more fun approach to the end of this podcast and try to rank Beckett's texts from best to worst?
Yes.
That we've read. Obviously, we haven't read everything. I feel like Watt would be pretty low if I read it, but it's called.
Why is that?
I just feel like I just feel like it's pretty close to the unnameable. I mean, obviously, I haven't read any of it, but I feel like it would be
from the 2-sentence summary that Dr. Lubner gave once. You're gonna rank it low.
Yeah, it's like I'm not here for that.
Oh, I hope one day you read it and why it ends up being like
my favorite, and I just try to write a book on it. And
yeah.
Maybe you'll
I do. I'll send it to you guys, and I'll be like, my life changed when I read Watt.
Yeah. Please do. If that happens, please do send that to me. Awesome. Well, I've got some paper. I have a pencil if we want to break
Perfect.
down our list, our tiers. How did you put it, Nick?
I think just like ranking them, and we can start from bottom to top. I think
Oh,
out
Yeah.
of the let's see, 5. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Here, I'm gonna write down all the ones that we've read. So we have Malloy, Malone Dies, yeah, Nameable, and then we have 2 of the plays as well.
Plays, yeah.
Awesome.
There's gonna be some contention between the plays here.
Okay, can I start with lowest, least enjoyable?
Yes.
100%.
Okay, I'm just gonna throw it in there. Malone Dies.
That's bold.
What?
I like Malone Dies.
My rationale. The Unnameable. It's crazy. It's like a disembodied presence that keeps starting different stories and never finishes them. This is something that like I've never read anything like before. Malloy, we have 2 interconnecting parts. Are Moran and Malloy the same person? Who knows? With Malone Dies, I just felt like it was a bit of a lull in the middle. It started strong, it ended strong. Maybe not a lull, but just didn't quite live up to the hype of the 2-part Malloy or the craziness of the Unnameable. There you go.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a bold pick.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's sound rationale, and I definitely get where you're coming from with it. The reason I would say, man, this is hard because I've enjoyed all of them so much. I would say the one probably least enjoyed or enjoyed in a different way entirely was probably the Unnameable. I would put the Unnameable at the bottom. And my rationale for that, outside of Malone Dies, is when Malone Dies, I made like this very intimate and personal connection with Malone, not only as a writer, but also looking at Malone as kind of like this pensive, very reflective, old human being, this old man. And I mean, the reflection I wrote on it, the created piece, Hyacinth, also on our website, is
Shameless plug out here.
I know, yeah, I gotta plug it. I think my personal connection is what keeps me from saying that's my least favorite, because I think outside of the text itself, I brought a lot into it that made it such a personal connection. With the Unnameable, I mean, I read philosophical works literally hours every single day, or almost every single day, and what this was for me was like a long strewn thought of kind of philosophical thought. Even Ben like kind of paralleled some of the ideas or the inner workings to Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Oh, what a book.
And yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed that book too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I took a class on that book my freshman year.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Fun time.
Yeah, it's a great book.
So
I don't know if you've read that before, Alice.
No.
It's by a MSU professor, an old MSU professor, actually.
Would you recommend?
Personally, I would, but it's very philosophical. Like
Okay.
the whole foundation is just philosophy. Just
Yeah.
doesn't make it any less better. It just means like access to it is all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps if the UK's lockdown gets extended for another 3 weeks,
Then
Yeah,
I'll just what better use of my time.
Yeah.
it would probably take 3 weeks to go through it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I mean, we literally read it for a whole semester.
Yeah.
In our class. Yeah, for me, first I have to mention that when Alice, earlier in the podcast, so I don't get called out, I think I accidentally said Malone Dies and Malloy when I meant to say Moran and Malloy, just for anyone who's paying attention, because I've been drinking a little bit and I think I screwed that up, and Alice reminded me that I did. But in a similar reasoning to Hunter, for me, like I've talked about, the Unnameable was the least accessible to me. I just struggled to get into it. And as someone who's an aspiring writer, I think Malone Dies brought an interesting perspective to me and made me really want to write more, which I was struggling to do kind of before I jumped in to do like my own creative writing before the text. Hence the more reflective versus research-based piece that I did on the website. And I think, yeah, that's the main reason why I liked Malloy Dies, was like very personal, like its perspective on writing. And I just struggled to get into the Unnameable. But I also think out of all of the 5 texts that we've read, those 2 would be my 5 and 4, and I would have the Unnameable at 5 and Malone Dies at 4.
I would accept that.
But I think the 2 plays and Malloy are a tick above, but personally. But I'm curious, should we have a vote on what number 5 is?
So I think you both have voiced your opinion, and you want the Unnameable last. And you know what? It's democracy. We can have the Unnameable last.
Oh,
No.
heck yeah. Well, and I mean, I also agree with that thought, Nick, on the idea that for me, I think Malone Dies would come in at number 4. Yeah, because I mean, I already explained my rationale behind it, but I think it's just the personal connections I brought into it that meant the most to me. All right, so bottom tier, we've got.
Which is still interesting because, like, I feel like even the Unnameable, as much as I struggled with it, is still like so much better than like the average novel that I read. Like,
Yeah.
it just like shows the quality of Beckett. Like that, the Unnameable could be like the quote unquote worst, or Malone Dies, the worst text that we read.
Yeah. This is why this exercise is kind of pointless.
Yeah, because it's like
it's funny to get your opinions on, I don't know, what constitutes best and worst. And
Yeah.
we apply this criteria to the works of Beckett that we've read.
Yeah, I just love arguing to rank texts and books and stuff.
It's a weird thing, but yeah, ranking.
It's so much fun. Yeah, it doesn't make any logical sense, but it's so much fun. And I wish I could send you. Dr. Lunar sent us a list of a list that he had seen through of the 100 greatest novels ever written. For the other class.
Number 1, like, what was the greatest novel?
I think it was Ulysses. I think Ulysses and A Portrait of a Young Man as an Artist. So we read Portrait in that class where I'm reading Virginia Woolf, British literature. I think both of those are pretty high. And I think Ben was upset that Woolf didn't have more. I can look up the list as you guys make some points for. So we're going to number 3 because now it gets tricky, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
I do just want to put out there, seeing as you call me out.
Sorry.
With Virginia Woolf, I studied like 1 or 2 of her texts very briefly in a first year module. So I'm talking like my first semester of my undergraduate degree. And I do feel like I'm, a few years older and I do need to revisit these texts. I think I just was so resistant in my, my first semester undergraduate degree. So, TBC, I will reread some Virginia Woolf. And
sorry to call you out there. But I also think like there are some. I mean, don't have a vast knowledge of Virginia Woolf. I've only read Mrs. Dalloway.
I'm just trying to gain back that Dr. Lubler's good opinion of me.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, I think I definitely think there are some valuable criticisms of her for sure. But this is a Beckett class, so I'll try to find that list while you guys can make your arguments for number 3.
Okay, so do you want to? You go first.
Sorry. I was gonna say on a note aside to that, I haven't read any Virginia Woolf, so you know what? Don't even worry about it. I'm not quite there yet to be in this argument, but yeah. As for number 3, I am yet to make up my mind. I have to give some more thought to it. Because, yeah, I enjoyed all three very much.
Okay, so it's difficult because I know my number. I'm happy with 5 and 4. I know my number 1. It's now just finding 2 and 3.
I think my number 3 is gonna make Hunter upset.
I think I've got the same number 3 then.
Oh,
I'm
no.
just gonna say it. I think Endgame. Endgame has to go at number 3.
I agree.
Nick, do you want to give your reasoning first?
Yeah, I mean, I think Endgame's awesome. I really like. I like both. I like his plays a lot because, in my experience in theater, I love the use of like a very minimal set. I think that typically in my very narrow experience of acting and directing, I really like how that just brings out the best in the actors from my experience. So I love Endgame. I don't think, and this might be like an outward reasoning. I don't think it's nearly as iconic as Waiting for Godot, and that's one of the reasons I like it. Waiting for Godot more, like when I think of Beckett, I think of Waiting for Godot, and I think Endgame is just like I can't even put my finger on it because they're all so close, but I like Waiting for Godot more, and I think I like Malloy more than Endgame.
I just
Really come up with like a definite reason for it because it's only positive things I have to say about it.
Yeah, I think in a similar way, I really, really enjoyed the plays, Endgame included. It almost feels like Endgame is the less successful cousin of Waiting for Godot.
I kind of agree with that.
Like, as good as it is, as successful as it has been, I still, like, it is kind of shadowed by, the awesome presence that is Waiting for Godot. And the reason I want Malloy ahead of Endgame, I don't know if it's because Malloy was like my first experience with Beckett, or I love the fact that it has these two characters, these dual narratives. I love thinking of the ways in which they could be connected, and in terms of themes and characters. And I just think it's confusing, but it's so clever. The way in which you read Moran's kind of narrative, which makes more kind of structural sense, and it also allows you to make more sense of Malloy's narrative. I really, really enjoyed that. Go on, Hunter.
Well,
defend your favorite.
About the success of Endgame and regarding it is Waiting for Godot's cousin. Do you, by success, do you mean success in delivery, or do you mean like mainstream success that followed behind it?
I guess I kind of meant mainstream success.
Okay.
Like when you think Beckett, you do think Waiting for Godot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that is just because I agree a lot more with that than delivery. Yeah, I mean, and this isn't to say what Endgame is better than Waiting for Godot. I think it was just more, once again, the connections I made with Endgame, especially being reflective on it. I mean, there were moments in Endgame where it hit me specifically or moved me in a particular way. But looking on it in reflection and even in literary analysis, there were just things I looked back on and was like, oh, wow, yeah, like that specifically was of great interest to me. But yeah, I understand where you guys are coming at with Waiting for Godot. At least I think I do. Nick, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's also, I think there's a part of it that Alice kind of alluded to, that the first book I read of Beckett's was Malloy, and the first play, right, was Waiting for Godot that we read. And I just think for some reason the first always like it sits better with me. And I don't know, when I think of Beckett, for some reason I always think the first two things I think of is Waiting for Godot and Malloy. So that's why I would put them above it, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. Well, so is there anything that you didn't enjoy? This is open to both of you, that you didn't enjoy about either of the plays specifically.
I can't even think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, I can't either. I mean, I just wanted to open that up because thought it'd be worth asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling. And I also just wanted to say that another reason why Waiting for Godot is at the top for me is on a very like a personal kind of scale. It's the only text I read in French as well. And I had a really cool copy, like a bilingual copy, French on the left and English on the right, line by line. And it was, such a great experience to be able to read it in French alongside the English. And I feel like that added an extra dimension for me. So that is another reason why Waiting for Godot is like right at top.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's totally understandable. I remember you explaining like the breakdown in like dialect and language as well, like the use between the two. And I thought that was super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But, so would both of you then put Endgame at number 3?
Yeah.
I would.
Sweet. Is Endgame 2 words or 1? I struggle every time I write this down. Is 1?
I think it's 1.
Yeah.
I wrote a whole essay about it in Avengers Endgame. I've written the word a lot of times.
I've
I
read
think
this
it's
several times and I still don't know.
Yeah. So I think my reasoning, like Malloy, also the reason I have it at 2, I just like the plays of Beckett a lot. And I think there's definitely like a world where Endgame and Waiting for Godot are 1 and 2. It's a very arbitrary list, but the experience of reading Malloy, and after like it took me about 15-20 pages before I like really kind of grasped it, and just like the feeling that it gave me was just something I had never experienced before reading a text. And I think it's interesting that I'll never forget when Lubner was like, hey, try to read the first 2 paragraphs before class, and I was like, are you what do you think we are? And I was like, fair enough, like I'm not gonna be able to read the first 2 paragraphs before our first day of class. And so the experience of Malloy, it was just so like disorienting in a way, but also like really broaden kind of how I was thinking about things, and like maybe want to think about like life in general, and like decomposition, deconstruction of not only civilization in like a literal sense, but also just like looking at narratives. So that's why Malloy would be 2. It probably because it was the first text that we read of Beckett's, but I love the contrasting plot lines between Malloy and Moran, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I can second everything you just said there, because I mean, as far as it goes with plays, Waiting for Godot, I mean, I absolutely loved it. I would say I can attribute my desire to see as many plays as I have this year to Waiting for Godot. It was like I read this script, or what would you deem it as? Just the play itself. I read it. Yeah, and well, and after reading the script, I mean, I just fell in love and felt like I was trying to fill a void by seeing other people act out, different plays. And so I mean, I feel like my passion for theater was just like reignited by Waiting for Godot. Like I read it and I was like, wow.
Like I gotta go see some plays.
Yeah. And then, I mean, to elaborate on Malloy, I mean, Malloy's narrative structure and the disorienting nature, like you pointed out, Alice, just captivated me entirely. And the fact that it was like disorienting, and the fact that you could tell what was happening, but why it was happening, or like the complete nonsense of what was surrounding it, is what made it so captivating. It's like, this is going on, like, Malloy runs over a dog and then a whole town is getting ready to murder him, and you're just like watching this unfold. And you're just like, I mean, this happening makes sense, but why it's happening, you're just like, what? Yeah. Anyways, I really enjoyed Malloy as Samuel Beckett's narrative in a novel too. So
are we gonna go for Malloy number 2 and Waiting for Godot at number 1?
Unless you have a good argument against. What was your original ranking of them?
What, me or Hunter?
Like you personally. Yeah, Alice.
I'm going, Waiting for Godot at the top,
Okay.
and Malloy.
Yeah, that's same with me.
Yeah, mine originally was Endgame and Waiting for Godot flipped. I mean, like I said, it comes down to something about Endgame resonated with me more, but it was the fact that both of them were plays. And then I thought it'd be an injustice for me to put Malloy anywhere else. It had to be like one play, one novel, because all of them I admired so much.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like I've read a decent amount of plays, and very few are like, after I read them, it's like that it's on my bucket list to go see that performed, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened with me in Waiting for Godot. Like, I've like, when you think of Tennessee Williams and her plays, I've read them all, and it's like I'd love to see them, but it's not like I want to search out seeing them. For Beckett and Waiting for Godot, that's definitely the case. I definitely want to see that live one day, and see it with a professional actors and a professional direction, and just see
Yeah.
it's an experience it, because I feel like all of Beckett's plays, even the ones we didn't read but we've kind of seen in some of the documentaries that have been recommended to us, it's like such a unique experience, like nothing else you can get at the theater.
Yeah.
So I really want to go and watch at least one of Beckett's plays, but definitely Waiting for Godot is at the top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've researched a lot of his plays, and I actually pulled one up about probably like an hour ago. It was a while back. There's several I want to see. I want to see a rendition, not a rendition, but just someone perform his play "Not I," where essentially it's the cutout in the wall and the mouth
Oh, the
is.
mouth. Oh, that would be so crazy.
Well, and I thought of it after Alice talked about the unnameable as being like a floating pair of lidless eyes, just these eyes that are always open. And it made me think of kind of like pairing with that really well.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard of it, I hadn't watched the documentary about it, and I was just like, there's this play where it's just a mouth
So,
with like really like red lipstick, and it's just a black background, and I was like, that can't even be real. And then watching the documentary was like, I would totally go and see that.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I've actually stumbled across a lot of pictures taken from productions of Happy Days, which I think is the one of the woman who is like increasingly like covered in sand, or like in
Yeah.
some kind of hill. And I haven't read that play, but it'd be interesting to see a play with a female protagonist. Do you not think?
Yeah, because we haven't read any with how he portrays the female character. So I definitely should I should probably read one of
Yeah,
those plays.
it's on my list to read.
Yeah. And Alice, I think you showed us a picture of that one. It's like the person, so the woman is covered in like rubble, and there's someone in the background at all points in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, I think she's up to her waist in the first act, and then like up to her neck.
Yeah.
In the second.
I also want to see that.
Yeah.
I really want to see Crab's Last Take as well. Like the whole, I mean, I really like the idea of kind of like a monologue, like a single person play. To me, that's just so interesting because, you talk about the minimalist set, Nick, and it seems to me that's just so achievable, to be able to do a one person play is, yeah.
Yeah, like I also trying to, with my also again very limited experience acting, but like to try and perform a play, or I can't remember the name of it, but the play where the character like is listening to tapes of their life.
Yeah. Crab's Last Take.
No, that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
Like imagine being that actor and just all the focus is on you, or even all the focus is just on your lips in the other plays, Not I.
Yeah.
Just he also really pushes, I've talked a lot about how he pushes narrative and my traditional viewpoint on what narrative is, but he also really pushes what an actor can do on stage, in a really cool way, I think. And that's why I want to experience at least one of his plays sometime, because it's just so different
Mm-hmm.
than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, I could honestly like sit here and talk Beckett with you for ages. I'm very conscious that I think we've passed an hour now.
Oh wow.
And
I get wrapping up here.
Yep.
Sweet. Well, yeah, so I think the list, what did we end up with? A nameable at 5.
Here, I'll
guys
throw
at
it
4.
up. What I did on the side, I wrote where we had contentions. I wrote names. Oh shit, is that flipped to you guys?
No, it's
no, that's good.
good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Sweet.
There we go. We've got Waiting for Godot on top, Malloy following, Endgame third, Malone dies fourth, and the unnameable, dare I say, last. I don't know. I
In
don't know.
5th place.
Yes.
Yeah, and on a last note, another thing that I've really liked about this specific group is how interesting it's been to hear, because like for a typical literature class, you just write your essay on kind of whatever you're interested in, but hearing what everyone else is kind of their other background, because literature is so wide, I think, in everyone's interest, like how Scott is in economics, also majoring in economics, and how he wrote a paper on that, and
Yeah.
how Hunter and Alyssa are both wrote things on philosophy, and then Alice has been very much kept it in with literature, and the Frankenstein essay in particular, comparing it to that, and how I wrote one essay on film and comparing it to Avengers Endgame. It's been kind of cool to see everyone's interest outside of just reading literature and kind of applying it to other mediums or other topics. I think has been one of the coolest parts also about this class.
Yeah. Easily. Yeah. We definitely had a diverse group.
Yeah.
And how we went about it too. Everybody had their own approach.
And hey, it all worked pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, on that note, yeah, I'm excited to see what comes of our final website update.
Yeah, me too.
Final, whatever that even means. We'll see. But,
Okay.
Yeah, sounds like an end for the last episode of Beckett's Group Therapy.